Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Kuf Ayin Zayin Sif Beis. We're talking about things which are eaten during a meal. Do you need to make a bracha for them? Yesterday we discussed ice cream and compotes, etc., etc. So now the Mechaber says in Sif Beis, Udvarim haboim la'acha suda koydem birchas hamazon. Things which you have after you finished eating, but before you've benched. It was a minhag in the times of the Gemara. They would hold back, they would sort of withdraw from eating bread, and they would remove the small tables which they had for bread. And they would then eat desserts that we would, fruits and things like that. And it wasn't only dessert type foods, it could be things which are normally eaten as part of a meal, and other things. To unin bracha, for those things, to unin bracha bein lifneihem and bein lachareim. They, because they're totally separate to the meal, you need a new bracha before and a bracha afterwards. Why? Because the hamoitzi and birchas hamazon only covers things which are part of the meal. Once you've sort of moved the bread away and you've finished the meal, even though you haven't benched in the times of the Gemara, then that's considered separate to the meal. That's considered separate to the meal. V'din zeh ha'achrin eina motzu beineinu. But this halacha, this practice is not really found nowadays. Because we sort of consider the meal to go all the way till Brachos hamazon. We don't hold back from eating bread. The bread is on the table and the meal continues till then. So this particular halacha is not really nogea nowadays. Says the Mishnah Berurah Yud Aleph, mainstays of the meal, meat, fish, etc. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Paris or masika, dessert type foods, fruit, other things. Like a dessert. According to this minhag in the times of the Gemara, where you'd sort of finish eating the bread and then you'd bring other foods, if you would bring mezonos type foods, they're not covered also by Brachos hamazon. The Brachos hamazon ain't a potem in shalish, because if they're separate to the meal, then even mezonos type foods, which would require their own al hamichya afterwards, even though you haven't yet benched, according to that practice in the times of the Gemara. You wouldn't sort of have any. You're not. Anything else eaten is not toffel to the bread. And therefore, you would require a separate bracha both before and afterwards. Just interestingly, when he says over here. Where is it? Yeah, he says lafisha, and he goes this. He says this minhag. He goes v'din zeh. The Mechaber says ha'achar eina motzu beineinu lafisha einon regil limshech yodeinu min hapas ad birchas hamazon. We don't hold back until birchas hamazon. So in the bir halacha in limshech yodeinu, he says v'im notel kais levarich hu hesachadas gomor. In the Bir Halacha, just the first line. I'm just reading those few words. Im not lakois levarich. If it came to the end of benching, at the end of the meal, and you want to bench, and someone was given the kais to say Rabbi nevarich, then that's considered the hesach hadas gomer, and therefore that's the. If you want to eat afterwards, you can't eat. Now that's just interesting halacha nowadays. That if a person takes a kais for benching and says Rabbi nevarich, if you want to eat after that, that's a siluk, and therefore you need a new bracha. Moreover, even saying the words "let's bench," that's considered a conclusion of the meal, and that would require a new bracha. So, for example, let's say the balabas says "let's bench," that's it. If you want to eat something else, you got to. And I'm careful when we've got guests, and they're still sipping their lemon tea, and I can say "let's bench." That's a shaila because they shouldn't really drink their lemon tea now without a new bracha rishona. So I'm careful not to say that. By the way, that only applies to saying let's bench. Singing or saying shir hamalis does not count as a siluk of the suda. So if you want to sing shir hamalis and they're still sipping their lemon tea, that's okay. But once you've said let's bench, that's considered the gemara of the suda, which would require a new bracha afterwards. Okay, gimel. V'im kovea lift on sudas ala peres. So this is something we touched on yesterday. if a person is koveya as his suda fruit, it's a fruit lunch. Havula peres kedvar maboy machmas hasuda. So therefore, now the fruit has the status of things which are normally eaten as part of the meal. And therefore, you would not require a bracha before or after. However, there are those who argue. The way around it to avoid this confusion is to eat a bit of bread with the fruit. And even if you therefore have some fruit afterwards without any bread, then you would not need to make a bracha on this fruit. Says the Ramah, and even if you don't eat bread at the end with the fruit, since the ikka kviyas of that meal happened to be with fruit, therefore it would not require its own bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah Tesvav, v'im kovea rotzaloma shekviyas sudas lafis apas hayurak elo peres. All you're having for lunch or for that meal is fruit. And therefore, it's like what we mentioned in Sif Aleph, the meat, the fish, and the mainstay of the meal. And therefore, they are covered by the bracha of hamoitzi and by benching. For yesh cholkin, there are those who argue why. Svir lehu, says Mishnah Berurah, mikol makom im ochel mehem b'tchila b'lo pas. If you ate some of these things without fruit, without bread, they're not considered tofu for the suda, and therefore they do require their own brachas. So there's a machlokas. And says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Yud Zayin, this is going on the Ramah, even if he says, according to the second opinion, that you're going to eat some stuff without bread, that's the ikka sudas, the ikka kviyas is on this fruit. What does it mean? The after besif aleph amrinan sheyechel pas dafka gamle basoif. We said in sif aleph, if you remember, that you eat a bit of bread at the beginning and at the end. Since you're being kaveh suda just on this fruit, once you ate the beginning with a bit of bread, then that suffices that you can eat fruit at the end even without bread. After even if you're not going to pass, even if you don't have any intention to eat more bread, we'll see a sikkum at the end in the Mishnah Berurah. He does a small sikkum which summarizes exactly what the halacha is with fruit. Okay, let's just finish Daled and Hey. Afal Pi, says the Mechaber in Daled, Afal Pi shelo hayu haperes lefonav b'shar sheberech lapas. In such a situation, when you're having just some, apples and oranges or whatever it is for fruit for lunch, and you wash, even if the fruit was not in front of you, given the lafes lapas hem boim einam tu'en bracha klal. Since lemaisa, this is the mainstay of this particular meal, you don't need a bracha on the fruit. Says the Mishnah Berurah Yudches, Shelo Hoyu, Va'afilu Lo Hoyu Gam Kein Dait Alem Beferish. Even if you didn't really have them in mind, you sort of wash and think, what shall I have for lunch? Okay, I'll have a bit of fruit. So even in that situation, the Kivin Shekaveh Asmal Achila, since this is your Kvias Achila is on this fruit, Hari Minastam Daita Al Kol Mashiavuloi. The odas is on whatever fruit is going to be brought, or whatever is going to be brought in that meal. In this case, it's fruit, and therefore it doesn't need to require bracha. Bracha klal pirush l'masha eichel mapas, i.e., for that which you're eating with bread. Masha eichel below pas nisbar b'sif makodim, and that which is when you eat the fruit without, that's subject to the previous sif, and we saw machlokas. Okay, hey, im achas sheberach alapas. Interesting. If after you made hamoitzi. So imagine you're sitting down and you're having lunch, you made hamoitzi, and then your next door neighbor walks in, they bring you some food from another house, which you're not being somech on them for food, you have your own food, but next door they brought in a kigel or something, and your mind when you made hamoitzi was not on this gift, even if it's food which is normally eaten as part of the meal, meat, fish, potatoes, whatever it may be, you didn't know about this. You can't say that your hamoitzi is going to cover this food because it came in the middle. So you hear that? Now that's the din of the Mechaber. So according to the Mechaber, you've washed, you've made hamoitzi, and suddenly the next door neighbor brings in a potato kigel. You'd have to make a ber pradam on it or a shakal, whatever. It depends how fine the potato is, right? You have to make a bracha. Says the Ramah, Haggah. I don't see people who are very particular about this. The time of the stam dasa odom al kol mashemivi lo besud v'ayin lekam siman reishayin. The Ramah says no. I don't see people who are careful about this. What? Yeah, but you don't always know the menu, right? But if this came in from the neighbors or from someone else and send you a gift, your das is just to eat whatever's there and finished. And therefore, this would be a difference of opinion between the Mechab and the Ramah, whether you need to make a bracha on something which just appears in the meal unexpected. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Katan Chav, Shedarkan Lavoi, Rotzolema, the gam eichel min pasta, you normally eat it with bread. Since it comes from another house, your mind was not on it. Therefore, the Mechaber says it's not covered by the hamoitzi, and therefore it would require a new bracha. But the Ramah says we don't see people who are noig like this, and your das is on anything that comes in the meal. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chaf Aleph, we're talking about things which are normally eaten as parts of the meal, like I said, fish, meat, whatever. Because if they brought in a fruit platter or something like that, then and then came melafis by pas. Because if it's a fruit platter, then it would require its own brachas if they're eaten independently. If they're eaten with bread, then it's different. Now here we go, just a few lines just to finish off this simon. So this is the rule as regards fruit during a meal. If you eat the fruit with bread, then it's partial. You don't need to make a bracha on the fruit. Your mamish eating it with bread. The nas tafel pas is considered subordinate, subsidiary to the pas. Even if you didn't intend this at the time of hamoitzi, if you eat it with bread, you do not need the bracha. And if you have fruit without bread, then it's very clear you need a bracha beforehand. Even if the fruit happened to be cooked, because it's like a dessert type thing, it's not really part of the meal, and you make a bracha whatever it may be. On ha'etz fruits, for example, grapes, apples, etc., you make ha'etz. On the hadoma fruits, pineapple, melon, strawberries, you make hadoma. But if you want to eat some with and some without bread, then you've got a machlokas. What should you do? Just to have a bit of the fruit without any bread, and then make a bracha on them. And then you're sorted. And then you can have the further continuation of fruit, either with or without bread. That's when you've got other things to eat during the meal. But if all you're eating is this fruit, since you have a little bit of the fruit, which is the entire meal, you're having that with bread, then then you can eat later in that meal without bread. So just to summarize, if you eat the fruit with bread, no bracha. If you eat the fruit without bread, you need a bracha. Ha'etz, hadoma, whatever it may be. If you're eating it with bread, if you're eating it with bread, so then a machlokas, does it need to be constantly with bread or not? Sometimes with, sometimes without. So then the eitzah would be, says the Mishnah Berurah, to have a little bit of the fruit on its own, you make a bracha. If the sole sum of your meal is just fruit, then as he says, since you eat a little bit of the fruit with bread, then that would allow you to eat the rest of it without. Okay, say that.